Thank you for joining us. I'm sure that you spent the last couple of days learning about tons of things and you're just itching to kind of go back and start building. Well, before I begin, can I take a quick poll? So who is part of your organization's security team? You can just raise your hand. Oh, okay, that's a lot of people. And what about developers in the audience? Raise your hand. Okay, a few more hands, that's great. And who here has used Access Analyzer? All right, well, okay, that's awesome. I'm so glad we're champions of Access Analyzer. So in this talk, I'm gonna help level set. So if you have not used Access Analyzer, that's fine. We're gonna get you up to speed and we're gonna talk about all the great features. If you've already used Access Analyzer, then you're already there in terms of experts. There's a lot of great stuff that we're launching, so this is gonna be great. Well, I'm Nini Ren, and I am a senior product manager with AWS Identity.
Hey, and I'm Florian. I'm a senior software development manager with AWS Identity.
So in the next hour, we're going to start with least privilege. We're going to talk about who's responsible and who's responsible for orchestrating least privilege environment. Then we're going to zoom into IAM Access Analyzer. We're going to talk about all the new features that we're going to launch and we've already launched and guiding you towards least privileged. Then we're going to dive into some live demos. And I work with Florian just a little bit before this. I swear they were working, but if there's a little bit of hitch, just work with me. So how do you think about your AWS access controls? I like to think of them into two big categories. I think of your coarse grain, and I think of your fine grain. On your coarse grain, these are things that you do at the organization level. So if you're in a multi-account environment, you have lots of accounts that are child under your organization and lots of other IAM roles and stuff. Coarse grain, that's at the organization level. And then you have your fine grain, and that's going towards your account level and lower. And so for your coarse grain, you're establishing data perimeter. So these are preventative guardrails to ensure that your trusted identities have access to your trusted resources from expected networks. And then when we dive deeper, we come to least privilege. And that's the idea that you only allow or grant the permissions that are required to complete a task or workload. So there, we actually think of it in terms of a cycle. You set, you verify, and then you refine your permissions over time. Let's talk about some key stakeholders. So you see the central security team and see the developer team. And central security, better known as cloud platform team, CloudSec, InfoSec. You also got your developer team. So those could be your application developers, dev team, builders, the people who do the hard work of coding. So I am actually going to put on my security hat on, and I'll turn it over to Florian as well.
Yeah. And for the sake of this talk, I'm going to be the developer team who is essentially building the applications, tries to come up with safe but also scalable applications. Obviously, these days I'm a manager, but back in the days when that picture was done, I still was a developer, so it's also quite dated.
Well, with my security team hat on, all of a sudden I feel like I'm really into security. So I want to make sure that nobody violates my organization security standards. Security is P0. But I'm also a chill guy. I want to make sure that Florian over here, he has all the tools he needs to succeed. In short, I have a tall order. I need to balance both these aspects. I'm going to go in a little bit in more detail in terms of my role as a security administrator. So I have 4 things I want to do. I want to set up the security standards. I want to establish a data perimeter. I want to be able to go deep and establish the right IAM configurations and then have the tool so Florian over here can succeed. In terms of the security standards, these are the best practices, best security practices. Do I have a well-architected environment? Do I have my critical data protected? And sometimes I'll even need to maybe have some break glass access, and I want to set up the right privacy controls. In terms of data perimeters, I think of it as creating this giant box and to say everything in this box I trust. I say what's allowed and what's denied. Then I dive into the nitty-gritty of IAM configuration. So these are your IAM roles, your users, your groups, your policies. I want to be able to create permission boundaries. I want to be able to inspect them, refine them, and do all that over time. Then, of course, Florian, I need to give him all the tools that he needs to move fast and move forward with his applications. For the rest of the session, I will focus more on security standards and IAM configurations, and in terms of how to set them up correctly, and then how to inspect and refine them.
Well, and in my role as developer, I'm essentially complementing this, where the first part is look at the tools Nini gives me, but also what's overall happening in the industry, what does AWS give me, how does the entire tool landscape look like, and which of those are actually useful to me? Like, which do I want to use, which should I use? I obviously care a lot about the actual resource access between my infrastructure so that they can talk to each other, that they can access each other, because obviously my application would be pretty pointless otherwise. I also try to understand better what are security best practices. I read up on this, obviously, but I also need tools to come back to the initial thing to help me here. And while as I develop my application, I also want to end up with fine-grained permissions to build a safe application that is not overly permissive, to essentially not get scolded by Nini and also not to put our customers at risk. And similar to what Nini said earlier, I'm also going to focus here at this talk at 2 of the 4 areas here, which is essentially the security practices part, mainly how can I learn about this and how can I make this easier for myself to make sure that I adhere to those security standards. And then also, how do I solve this fine-grained permission problem? How do I get there? What are cool mechanisms to go there? And also making sure that in this entire process, I don't keep Nini too busy because he has 10 other teams to care to as well.
Well, Florian, I've noticed that you come to me with these applications, you have these policies on them, I got to review them and then ask you to go tweak it, and then you go tweak it, and then you come back to me and I got to say tweak it a little bit more. It takes a lot of time. I feel like some of this could be better. And I really wish that I can reduce that process to make your process easier and to make my life a little bit better. Well, there's a broader trend in the industry of empowering developers to give them the tools that they need to be able to define their permissions. So previously, you have this, right now there's this move from centralization to decentralization. And so previously, me as the central administrator, I'd be the one who approves policies, I'd be the one who makes sure that everything gets approved and gets looked after, and I'm the in-house policy expert. Now, I want to be able to move some of that work to Florian, and I want to have solutions that Florian can use to be able to write his fine-grained permissions correctly, while I have additional tools to make that possible. This is actually under the broader umbrella of a broader need. So customers tell us that they need better cloud infrastructure entitlement management solutions, better known as KIM, and Access Analyzer fits in as one part of the entire picture. So we fit under the right size portion. We set, verify, and refine permissions over time. And then when you're looking at other capabilities, for example, like anomaly detection, you can go to Amazon Guard Duty. If you're looking for visualization, you can go to Amazon Detective. And if you want to look at compliance reporting, you can go to AWS Audit Manager. So before we continue, let me take off my security team hat, and don't worry, I'll pick it up later. And let's zoom in on Access Analyzer. One takeaway, and if there is no other takeaway in your presentation, in this presentation, and I'm a little bit biased, like from Inforce, when you think of least privilege, think of Access Analyzer, least privilege, Access Analyzer. So we'll zoom in terms of where it fits, and if it's right there, it fits in least privilege. I think of least privilege as a journey rather than destination, and this is simply because things change over time. You as a company, you may acquire different companies, your organizations change, your workload changes, your use case changes, your infrastructure changes. All those require changes to your permissions over time. And so you will set, verify, and refine those over time. Let's dig in more into Access Analyzer features. So we have features broadly categorized into those 3 buckets. So if you want to set the right permissions, you can use policy validation. These are better known as default policy checks. And every time you go into your console, every time you want to write a JSON, what policy validation does is it checks if it complies with AWS policy grammar. And in the verify portion, you want to make sure that whatever you write is actually what you intend. So we have external access findings. You probably write a lot of resource policies. You probably grant access cross-account and hopefully not too much public access, or if at all. Those you use external access findings. Access Analyzer does the legwork of checking those for you and examining if you have any of that. And then you get to the refine portion. We have two features. We have last access information. So if you have a role or user, you can go into one and say, hey, what are the actions or permissions that are not being used? Or when was the last time they were used? And once you know that information, you can go back to policy and scope it down. We also have policy generation. So we have the ability to look at CloudTrail logs over the 200 services that we support and create a fine-grained permission. And before I forget, here's a pro tip. If you're developing an application in your sandbox, make sure it's stable and then use policy generation before you launch it to prod. All right, well, we actually launched 2 new features during reInvent last year, and we added that to our family of Access Analyzer features. So one, we have custom policy checks, and they identify the critical permissions in your policies. Give it 2 permissions, one is a reference, one's the new one, and then you can see the new one grant more access. Did it grant access to maybe a custom set of actions I really don't want people to have access to? We also have unused access now, and it helps you identify and review the unused access in your AWS organization and in your accounts. Let's dive into unused permissions. So some questions I've gotten before is, well, you have last access information and then you have unused access. When do I use which? Last access information is great if you know the IAM role that you want to inspect. And you can take a deeper look at it, look at the individual permissions, and that's great. Unused access, we've heard a lot of customers say, hey, we want visibility. I have hundreds of IAM roles. I have a lot of accounts. I need to understand this environment that I'm operating in and how much of these unused access is really accumulating. So let me just start there. We've heard from customers that privilege creep is an increasing problem. So a lot of people start broad. As a central security administrator, you might help your developers move fast. And in the beginning, the permissions are broad. You want to be able to explore the space of different AWS services. And what happens is your businesses change. You get there's some reorgs. There's a change in the cloud hybrid environment. There's a new change in terms of a job or role or function. Things change, and that's very natural. But what happens is that the need to monitor that unused access just becomes greater. And the tools, sometimes developed natively, become a little cost prohibitive. And that part of achieving least privilege, customers tell us they want us to reduce the friction. So we got a solution. It's IAM Access Analyzer, and it's our unused access solution. So first, IAM Access Analyzer helps you inspect IAM unused access for keys, passwords, IAM roles, and then for your IAM principals, it goes to the depth of the permissions and the services that are unused. And then we have a centralized findings dashboard. For those who use Access Analyzer, this is in the same place where we have external access findings. So we aggregate that information for you. You can go look at it. You can look at, so what are the unused permissions? What are the unused access keys? And then you can filter down and then go straight to all the different entities that have that. As a security administrator, this is really powerful. So especially if I set up an analyzer at my organization level, I just get to see, here are all my developers, here are all the other teams that are in my organization, here's all the unused permissions in my organization. To summarize, you accumulate permissions, and you should go use IAM Access Analyzer to refine those permissions over time. And unused access helps you continuously monitor and identify broad IAM access. You can review and inspect things from a centralized dashboard. And then we have some integrations. So you can go to AWS Security Hub, where we have aggregate those findings as well. And then we automate the notifications to your developers, for example, through Amazon EventBridge. Well, if you were at the keynote yesterday, I think Chris Betts might have beaten me to the punch, but we're super, super excited that we're launching recommendations for unused access findings. So let's dive into it. These recommendations are actionable, step-by-step guidance to help remove those pesky permissions that you actually don't need. And we offer these recommendations for unused access for the same keys, the passwords, the IAM roles, and for your IAM principals, all the different services and actions that you don't use. And best of all, you can share those with your developers. And if your developers have access to IAM Access Analyzer, they'll be able to see those same recommendations. This feature is offered at no additional cost on top of unused access findings, and is part of our growing set of KIM capabilities in AWS. Now, I like to think of recommendations for unused access like Marie Kondo's recommendations for tidying up. And believe me, you will help spark joy for your organizations when you remove all those accumulated and pesky unused access permissions. All right, I'm going to put on my security hat back on, and I'm going to go straight into the demo. So in order to get to IAM Access Analyzer, I'll just level set. You can always go to IAM first. So you can just type IAM. It already has Access Analyzer here, but suppose we just go to IAM because that's pretty easy. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you see Access Reports, and this is where Access Analyzer lives. So let's just dive into unused access. So as you can see, I have an analyzer created for my entire current organization. And this is why there's so many different roles, unused permissions. I swear there's access keys I saw earlier. It's probably on page 4. There you go, access keys. So these are all the things that are kind of accumulating with unused access in my organization. So let me go to someone that I want to actually scope down access for. So just give me 1 second. So Dan Ying is a developer in my organization, and he's this IAM user right here. So I can go to his finding ID. And this is his unused permissions. He's mainly creating some S3s. All actions are unused, okay. And then when I go down here a little bit, I see this new recommendations page. And so step 1, if I want to start remediating his unused permissions, I can actually go into his account, which I'll do in a second. But I just want to let you see, let's preview this policy. What is he up to? Oh my God, he has star on all S3s? Well, that really just can't do. So we gotta scope it down and actually specify what are all the actions that are allowed. So here you see on the right-hand side, these are automatically generated in terms of all the different actions that he's allowed to do. So if they're unused, they won't be here. I can go look at the next policy, pretty simple. This one looks a little bit better. It was a bit longer here, scoped it down a little bit. That's great. So let me go to a previous policy, and let me just show you how I can attach this pretty easily if I want to change, scope down Dan Ying's permissions. So I copy this, and then what I can do is I go to policies, and I'll have to create a new IAM custom policy. So I don't want to select this. I can directly go to JSON, copy this in, do next, policy name, best policy ever. Use this from now on, please. All right. You can do some additional tags if you want, that's fine. All right, create policy. All right, let me just make sure I have this best policy ever. There we go, it's there. And then I was saying earlier, it gives you directly the IAM user in this case, but we'll give you directly the IAM role. Click into it. And then great, we can add permissions. Add permissions, attach policies directly. Then best policy ever. There you go, boom. Go next. Just make sure everything looks good, review this. You can add permissions. Okay, so this won't really change anything because Jianying wasn't using any of those actions. So that's why we took away the star and try to make sure that only the actions that he used were allowed in his policy. Okay, let's go back to the unused access dashboard here. There's some unused roles. There's some things here. I mean, I can go to an access key. And maybe we can go there too. It's pretty. So for this one, I would have to sign into his account and then use this URL to go there and then remove those access keys. So those are the step-by-step directions. Now, earlier I talked about the centralized dashboard. This is it. This is where you have external access findings. And this looks at, for example, if you have any public access, I have 0, thank God, it's really great. Access outside the organization, yeah, it's gonna have some, there's some cross-account sharing that's happening. And then you get this distribution. It's gonna be all blue, because good that there's no public access. And then there's some breakdowns by the primary resource types that I use. And then right below, we have unused access. Lots of roles, unused credentials, unused permissions. Wow, okay. There's a lot of stuff that's happening across my organization. So here we have the accounts that are kind of organized as well. So I noticed on my app team, oh man, there's a lot going on here. I think I need to dive into them and try to clean this up. I also noticed that for my central sec organization, I could do a little bit better too. So I could go in and remove that. And these are filters. And so even if you want, you could just go view findings. It automatically filters your findings, and then there you go. You have your unused permissions and roles for that specific filter. You can go back. And here is also another great way I found to be pretty useful. If I just want to target roles with unused permissions, I just go view findings, boom, filters it out. Here are all the unused permissions for my different roles in my organization. So there are some additional resources. We just released our new What's New post yesterday. I'll leave this slide up for a couple of seconds so you can take a picture. There's a documentation and then the service page at large.
And I guess that's where I'm taking over with the two areas I was talking about earlier. The first one being, how can I stay up to date with security recommendations, with best practices? How essentially do I make sure I don't screw up? And then also, what tools can I use to free up Nini's time so he actually can care more about more teams can scale more? Let's start with the first part, with how can I make sure that I don't screw up, to put it bluntly. We have quite some tools within Access Analyzer. The first one we have is policy validation. We launched last reInvent custom policy checks. And those of you who looked at the schedule obviously saw a new launch, which means, of course, we launched something else. We added more custom policy checks. We also added more, and I'm going to talk about those in a few minutes. But let's start with the one we launched the first. It's the very first one, IAM Access Analyzer policy validation. Those of you who already created or modified a policy in the IAM console already did use it. Maybe you did not even realize it, because it's literally hiding right in the middle, where this very, very subtle small arrow is pointing to. IAM Access Analyzer policy validation does right now about 138 different checks, ranging from pretty scary stuff, security warnings you probably should take serious, all the way to suggestions, to recommendations, which essentially is how to make your policy a little bit tidier, a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient. And we group this down there. You see here rather bad, scary warning down there, password with star in resource, so you would allow someone to assume any role in an account, which obviously is most of the time not what you want. This is something we here showing in the console, but everything we're demoing today, everything we're discussing today is also available in our API, which means you can use this any of our SDKs. I'm going to demo later how to use it with the CLI, but you also can include this in any of your workflows, however your organization, your teams manage policies. So you can do this at scale. Obviously, for demo purposes, we're keeping it a little simple in the console, but that's why we're showing our console here. So how does this help, and why should I even automate? Well, we kind of already hinted at it. First of all, Nini has time for a coffee break, which I think is a great thing. But overall, you want to scale, that's one thing. And more important, you want to get feedback fast. Like we sometimes hear from customers that their policy changes need to undergo a manual review where essentially I propose a change to my permission, send this to a central security team, and then they need to review this. And a few days later, I get a thumbs up or thumbs down, or maybe just start from scratch all over again. So from my developer perspective, it's way faster, it's way more convenient to get within a few seconds a response to should I be doing this, or at least be able to understand which part of the changes are okay and which of those I probably need some more expert help. And then speaking of the expert help, Nini has more time, can look more at more teams, but also can develop on top of what we built custom in-house tools, solutions. Like I said, this is all programmatically available to really customize it to what you need in your company, depending on your risk profile and where you are. If you just bootstrapping startup or under a lot of different compliance aspects or anything in between. Now, I'm already bragging so much about customizable. I guess you all spotted it. What I just showed is not customizable at all. IAM policy validation is pretty much what we as AWS think you should care about. And it's a very binary thing. It gives you a lot of warnings, but they're there or they're not. And that's where our newer launches come into play. Custom policy checks. Those work slightly different. They check for a certain thing. The names, the APIs, the CLI commands, they're all pretty much named in your face. They say exactly what they do. And you can use them as a construct to build on top for your custom rules. Unlike policy validation, which we just looked at, those are not free. We charge for them, so please look this up before Nini yells at you and the finance person next to him. But they're really, really powerful. And what I love the most about this, they're all backed by automated reasoning, just like most of Access Analyzer tools. So they're safe, they're guaranteed to be accurate, and they really give you a great confidence. Let's talk about the first two, which we already launched earlier. Nothing new until now, but still super interesting. Check no new access is very simple. It literally does what it says on the tin. You give it a reference policy or the old version of the policy, whatever it is, and now my new proposed policy can be evaluated. Do I give myself more access? The reference policy can be something which is either the entire construct of everything I'm allowed to do, Nini defined, or just my last revision, do I dumb it down? Which obviously makes Nini's job already way more powerful, way easier, and less work, of course, because everything that gives not new access, I'm just removing access, or it just keeps where it is, he doesn't need to look at it. I mean, why would he? There's no risk tied to this. And in that sense, it's already a very powerful one. The second one is check access not granted. It does as well as the other one, what it says on the tin. You give it a list of actions you do not want to give by default. Deleting data, accessing sensitive data, whatever makes sense for your organization. And it allows anything beyond those. So I could even add permissions as long as I don't touch those. Nini declared as hands off Florian, you're not expert for this. Now, we were here at the launch. We mentioned the launch, so of course we expanded those. We expanded custom policy checks for public access and also the access not granted. So what does this mean? It's very easy. Let's start with the rightmost. Check no public access. That's, again, the third one, just what it says on the tin. It makes sure your permission does not give access to the public, meaning to all AWS accounts or even worldwide to the internet. There might be legitimate use cases, of course, like your website, but oftentimes you don't want this, and for sure you always want to engage Nini in this conversation to make sure it's actually a legitimate use. Works exactly as we said before, works in the CLI and the SDK and so on. I think by now you know the drill. The other thing, which is also very interesting, we expanded check access not granted. I just described how you can give it a list of actions you're not supposed to do. We now added support for resources because, for example, think about buckets. Some of the S3 buckets are probably pretty straightforward. I can do something with it, but some of them also have really tricky data. I probably should not just go insane on it without having Nini a much, much closer look. And now Nini can use this rule to specify which of those resources are something he wants to have a second look before I get the access, and which is something I can fully automated just pass through. So what does this mean? I can now automate policy reviews in my custom workflow, which could be a CI/CD pipeline, which could be, I don't know, a GitHub-based workflow, Jira ticket-based. We hear a lot of different workflows from customers they do use. I can configure those checks based on my rules, based on the inputs I'm doing, and I can scale this. And again, it's accurate, it's powered by automated reasoning, it's not just a string matching, and in that sense, it is way more reliable and scalable to free up Nini. Where do I use it? Good question. Depends on how your team works. What we hear a lot, what we see a lot is customers use it in their CI/CD process as part of rolling out CloudFormation. We even have a open source solution for this in AWS labs you can use for this, where essentially lints your finalized CloudFormation policy, CloudFormation templates, to make sure those adhere to it, which is where most customers use it. So engineers can play with it in a development environment, but as it is about to get deployed in my test environment or even just in production, that's where I can have this hook and just be like, hands off, you're going too far, talk to Nini first. But of course, depending on what your teams do, you can also do this earlier. You can use this to help already in the peer review, where one of your other engineers does it as part of a code review check. You can have this in a separate workflow. So it really depends on where exactly you want to use it, but it is very customizable both with what it checks and also how you use it. Now, nothing then without a demo. So let's do a few more custom policy checks in action here. Nini was supposed to swap my laptop for his because, of course, we're running on different machines. Let's see if it actually worked. I'm now intentionally, for the sake of this demo, working with very simple policies. So it is a very fair statement. I could just use string matching here. But as a reminder, this uses automated reasoning and also all of our AWS knowledge about how authorization in AWS works, which, for example, means we obviously also deal with things like wildcards or not actions, complicated condition key statements, any of this. I figured it's probably much easier to go slow here with an easy demo, but this is obviously something you can use to the entire AWS scale and automate. Let's start with the very first demo. I have this very, very small policy called website policy. It's something I have in my document as well. So let's just see if I can move this next to it. Yeah, that is obviously cheating. So what I'm gonna do first, I'm first just doing the access not granted check, where we're essentially pretending to be Nini, and Nini just told me, you totally can get data out of a bucket, but you're not allowed to modify or delete it. An interesting feature there, by the way, is the last parameter here in my demo already gives it away. We also do support resource policies, various resources, especially for the public access. This gets interesting, but it also obviously for our use case. Here, for my demo, I'm going to focus as an identity policy, meaning something that's attached to an IAM role or an IAM user, but you could use the exact same checks and balances for any other resource type we support. So I'm now doing good old copy pasting. Let's try this command. And surprisingly, the internet works. Unsurprisingly, I'm okay with going forward, because as a reminder, I'm just doing get object. But now, obviously, this is going to change in a second, because I want to do more fancy stuff. Who doesn't want to label their entire web page of their company in pink or have unicorns on it? So I want to modify it, and I'm lazy as well. So I'm just going *:*. And let's try this again. I'm pretty sure you all know what to expect. It's going to fail. Boy, that would have been embarrassing if I now screwed up the demo, but I didn't. It does fail, and it also gives you more information, which especially is interesting for the part where Nini or Nini's tools then give me feedback. It obviously tells me it failed, I did not pass, I used actually both of the actions because I used S3 star, but it also tells me why it failed and where it failed. It used the statement ID. Here, obviously, I only have one, which is here, line 5, website asset access. But like I said, you can use this for more complex policies where it gets really tricky really fast to figure out where exactly does this happen. In a world with wildcards and not action, sometimes you don't even find the action you're looking for. And that's where it's helpful, which is also a great reminder. Statement IDs are optional, you don't have to use them, but they're a really great tool to actually make complex policies understandable, especially in a situation where Nini and I have to work together on it. So we have to talk about it and figure out what does this actually mean. Now, we also spoke about the new launch we just did. The expansion, well, the tooltip doesn't help. This works better. It's still check access not granted. Nini still wants to make sure I'm not doing something stupid, but now he cares about the customer data bucket. I don't know. I want to now customize my cool web page. Every customer should be greeted by their first name and also with their social security number and whatever else we have stored there. I think that's great for interaction. Nini thinks otherwise, so he implemented this rule. And let's just try this all over again. This is what we just launched yesterday. So I'm going back to my policy. And I like stars today. Obviously, I could just use the name of the other buckets I want to do. I can add this, but let's do stars for today. Clear the screen so it doesn't get as confusing and try it again. Unsurprisingly, virtual codified Nini is immediately yelling at me again. I am still not allowed to do what I'm trying to do, obviously, because now we checked against resources. Now, obviously, unsurprisingly, this is something you can also combine. So for example, Nini could also define something like, I'm not allowed to delete something from a certain bucket, so I would just combine resources and actions in the same check. It's hiding behind here, that's the CLI commands. The API looks pretty much the same. It's all, it should be very straightforward, but really powerful to incorporate in your workflows. Obviously, you can do multiple checks. I'm pretty sure you have more than just one rule for your entire situation. Nini at least harasses me always with millions of rules, so he's going to have a field day with what we just launched, which wraps up the first of those checks. The other one is a different one, which is now obviously, some of you may already spot it, I screwed up this policy big time. It says principal AWS star, which means any AWS account can just go there, get my precious customer data. More important, actually can't get it, but can put it, can mess around with this, can modify it, which is something I guess Nini right now is contemplating to retire over there because that really should be very obvious. But nevertheless, we have this policy. We can check for public access. Obviously, it fails as well. If I were to fix it, it now would be successful, happy, pretty unsurprising. But what's really interesting here is we now have suddenly a resource type showing up. That's very easy. We support all sort of policies across AWS that may give you public access. Access Analyzer overall cares about public access, cross-organization sharing as well. Nini gave a quick intro in this. And that uses essentially the same logic, the same technology behind the scenes, which you now can use here as well. Now, finishing up my demo. Oh, I forgot the button. You can find more here, but as a reminder, this was pretty simple. I mean, seriously, all of you probably could come up with a regular expression or some few string comparison to fix what I just did. That's very easy. But the beautiful part of this is if you now take the idea of what I just demoed, of those tests, and take this with you in your pipelines, depending on how your company works. In your CI/CD pipeline, in your internal review processes, in your code reviews, and then enhance this. Use multiple rules, multiple of those checks, make this configurable. Use this as building blocks we provide to really customize to how you manage policies in your company. And be aware that, like I probably said 5 times by now, We're using automated reasoning. We're really trying to be as good as possible, and I believe we really managed it, to make sure even complex policies deliver those where the naive string matching approach in similar would obviously fail. And last but not least, give us feedback, both here for the talk, but also what I really would like to get is, how do you incorporate this? Let us know, talk to your TAM, talk to us, so we know how to best incorporate this, how to even simplify this more. And at some point, Nini really can happily retire without having to worry ever about his. So.
Well, thank you, Florian. So I got some key takeaways. IAM Access Analyzer is your best friend in least privilege. Remember, least privilege, IAM Access Analyzer. You can Marie Kondo your unused permissions with IAM Access Analyzer, and it will spark joy for your entire organization. I mean it. And then no more back and forth with your developer. This thing that Florian and I had before, it's going to go away. So that's going to be great. Use custom policy checks and let Access Analyzer do the legwork of automated reasoning and do that for you. Well, congratulations. You are all now IAM Access Analyzer experts. Thank you again for joining us here. Feel free to reach us over email or LinkedIn. We'll be off stage if you have few questions. See you next time.